I just wanted to share some of the things I've thought about capitalism over the past year since I've gone through the secure creditor process. I try to relate things to natural law and figure out what sources. So from there, I just thought about an artisan living in a village by a river that's rich and abundant in clay. The artisan would collect the clay for free, except for time and labor. Then they create the pottery for free and then trades it with other people. Since the artist lives in a tribal setting, the home they live in and the food they eat is also free, at least free in a way, except for the time and labor exerted to create and harvest it by other members of the group. Then contrasted with the modern artist, at least in my perspective, living in Los Angeles, artisans nowadays rent apartments, they purchase their food and purchase their tools. Because the artist doesn't have land of their own, they must also purchase clay and rent studio space and equipment. What was once relatively free now requires 8 times more money, which equates to 8 times more labor to cover costs. The artist must pay for the land which the clay was taken from, the human labor and gas that went into harvesting that clay, the labor and gas it took to refine, package, and ship the clay, plus tax and the cost of the employee who sold the clay in the store. When the artist finally has a finished product, they must take into account the cost of showing their work, since most artisans have to pay for booth space or pay by commission, which can be up to 50% of the final sale price. They must also pay for shipping and packaging, networking materials, classes, business registrations, taxes, etc. Even if there is clay near the city, it's most likely government land, and I doubt a herd of artists collecting earth would go unnoticed. And even if we could gather the clay ourselves, how many artists even know how to harvest clay, or know what to look for, or where to look? We haven't retained these survival skills. By the time everything is added up, the price of the pottery skyrockets to a bracket that really only the upper middle class and the wealthy can afford, which is a minority group of people. Now we have thousands and thousands of artists fighting for the attention of a small demographic of people, and many of those people just go to Pier 1 imports anyways. So where do we find artists nowadays? Well, they're working at McDonald's, Uber, they're teaching, working at your local hipster cafe. Artisans went from creating things we needed and enjoyed to making our morning coffee. This is when I hear my uncle, because he's always saying that it's cheaper to purchase products from overseas. And purchasing products from Americans is too expensive and unsustainable for the company. In the back of my mind, I just kind of felt like that wasn't necessarily true. Maybe parts of it are. But using the pottery analogy again, we've already established that American artists are indeed too expensive in our present economic model. So I use my imagination to figure out how the Chinese artisan is cheaper. First off, we know that the Chinese artist uses the exact same materials and the exact same time is exerted to make the pottery. We know that under natural law, our real world reality, there is no price difference between the two artists. So there must be something else that distinguishes the Chinese artists, making them cheaper. I think most of us know that our currency isn't based in anything tangible like silver, making it a fiat currency. All fiat currency is based in credit, which is a fancy way of saying it's based in unactualized potential. The American Federal Reserve note has been artificially propped up as the strongest credit. The currencies in most third world countries, especially in China, are also fiat, and their currency is artificially held lower than the American dollar and euro, so that Westerners will purchase products manufactured by them. This is the importance of communism, socialism, and the like in countries that manufacture goods. Resources must be allocated to the people by the central government in precise minimal amounts so as to maximize profits for international business. Thus, the elitists in third world countries continue to grow their personal empires while their people slave away. Socialist societies enable slavery. I would like to emphasize that this corporate and economic system is artificial. All the same materials and amount of human labor is used in order to create the same outcome. The only reason why items from overseas are cheaper is because slaves are making the product. So let's say an American artist harvests nearby clay, makes their pottery, and sells it in the local farmers market without a business permit or tax registration certificate. How much money went into the creation of this product? Probably not much. Now let's say that a Chinese artist harvests their own clay, creates the pottery, then packages and ships it to America, where somebody else has to sell it. How can something that came from the other side of the world and went through 3 times more hands be so cheap? How many more materials were used in the second scenario? How many more people were involved in getting this item to the consumer? What is the real world cost of pottery created from a Chinese artisan? In the real world, this model is not cheaper. In actuality, it's more expensive. Instead of paying the actual price up front, you end up paying considerably more over time, with increasing burden placed upon each subsequent generation. By lowering the price of the item, you lower the value of the human life that made it, and you also lower the value of the resources provided to us by the earth. If a ceramic vase in America costs $45, then a ceramic vase from India should cost $75. Items are priced at a certain rate to keep the equilibrium of the planet. When humans artificially lower the real world cost of an item, it opens the door to exploitation, which has dire consequences such as climate change and famine. Capitalism cannot succeed without socialism, communism, or the like backing it up. Manufacturing jobs are moved overseas to third world countries where their money is artificially held down, thus creating slave labor through socialist systems. Because of the lack of jobs coupled with a constant outflow of money, Americans must settle for working harder and longer for less pay, making us indentured servants for now and corporate slaves in the future. From beginning to end, human life serves the corporation instead of the corporation serving human life. My cousin is trying to start a company selling hardware equipment. He purchases his products from a manufacturing company in China and sells them online. He's a hard worker, but is only breaking even so far and has lost money on a few ventures. I'm not negating his skill as a businessman, but I see the larger game at work and know that his efforts aren't going to get him very far in the long run. First, the only hardware stores nowadays are mainly chains like Osh, Home Depot, or the Do It Center. If somebody wants something, they will most likely go there. All Oshes sell the same products. All Home Depots sell the same products. And even the two stores sell the exact same brands for the exact same prices. We are purchasing the same products made by the same people and sold in the same places, no matter what chain store we go to. This concentrates the wealth into the hands of very few, and this makes it so that the same groups of people are getting paid every single time. The odds of my cousin's products being sold in Osh are slight. His products are more or less the same as anyone else's, but he's an off-brand, which lowers his chances until his brand becomes recognizable, which will be difficult. Anyone can purchase materials from China. Anyone can make solid perfume, design clothing, create pottery. But the people that get into major chain stores are the ones who can afford to purchase the largest amount of the highest quality materials at, quote, affordable prices. They're also the same people who can afford the advertising necessary to create a strong and recognizable brand to attract people to the stores in the first place. Because people have become more accustomed to logos and commercial sponsors than our own neighbors who we used to rely upon, we don't go to locally owned hardware stores or purchase off-brand, locally manufactured materials anymore. Many of us don't support our local community, and even when we want to, the prices make it impossible to purchase locally 100% of the time. And this is something I definitely struggle with. I would love to purchase locally more often, but I just can't afford it. Chains are said to give local communities jobs, and this is partially true. When we look at the pyramid structure of McDonald's, we see that the people doing the majority of the grunt work make menial wage, hovering just above poverty. Every time you go to McDonald's, it makes its way to the centralized top. When you spend $1 in Eagle Rock, California, a percentage of that dollar will find its way to one of the small group of people who operate the company. This means that money is leaving your town, and the amount that's being returned is menial and low wage. Because of these jobs, the only places one can afford are other chains, and the cycle repeats itself. When you have a community full of chains, it's usually where most people aren't making that much money. There is more money flowing out than in. In our earlier model, the local clothing designer purchased fabric from the local loom, who got their cotton from the local farmer. This is the cheapest model, period. When we first moved away from this model, there was an initial boom, but this was followed by the town's slow and inevitable decay. Because it's, quote, cheaper, the local loom decides to buy their cotton from slaves in India, making their fabric cheaper, which makes the clothing cheaper. At this point, you've done one of two things to the American farmer. First, in order to compete with India, the American must now operate as a slave plantation as well. Or second, you drive the American farmer out of business altogether. Now that they're out of business, the farmer must take a job at the loom. Because the community still has the majority of their wealth circulating within it, the job at the loom pays well and people can still live a comfortable life. To make more money, the owner of the loom decides to send his manufacturing work to slaves in India as well. Now, farmers and factory workers are out of the job and are all competing for the designers' jobs. But there are two problems. Number one, there aren't enough designer jobs for 2/3 of the population. And number two, nobody has enough money to purchase the clothing anymore, anyways. So, what jobs there were are now shrinking as well. To compete, the designer first cuts the pay of their workers. Although a small percentage of the town has wealth, the majority of the township is pretty much poverty stricken and cannot afford much of anything. The designer sends her company overseas, closes her shop in the first town, and moves to a wealthier township where the people can afford her. Now the only jobs left in the first town are relatively low-wage, service-based jobs, i.e. teaching, nursing, waiters, etc. Because the town is now in a permanent state of recession, the entirety of the town must rely on handouts from the wealthy, who at this point have purchased all available land and resources. So even if people of the town have the talent to create goods, they're barred from using the resources on the land they were born on. The town becomes increasingly dependent upon the minority group of people who still have income, land, and access to resources. And the town's government is also the big brother of all corporations through tax registration, which has directly plugged all corporations into itself. In addition, this same federal government also takes roughly 40% of each individual's annual income, and this federal government uses your 40% to subsidize the very same corporations that placed us into this condition in the first place. With this connection, you can now enter socialism. Capitalism has taken everybody off their land, and socialism educated the children with meaningless information while simultaneously keeping them from learning survival skills and independence. Now they send all the jobs to slaves in foreign lands and turn our own people into indentured servants. The only jobs left are service-based and government work. When more people start relying on the system, more people will start working for the government, which means more taxes will be taken out of the pockets of citizens, and the cycle continues. When the system finally hits zero, which it will, capitalism will no longer be necessary, and you can then replace our capitalist system with socialism. Capitalism is the vehicle which removes people from their land, resources, life skills, and each other. We go from relying on nature to being dependent upon a minority group of people, aka government, monarchies, and major banking institutions, who hoard resources for sport. Capitalism, socialism, communism, and every other ism you can think of devalues life. People in foreign countries are paid a lesser amount, essentially saying that their life and contribution to the world is less than that of another person for no other reason than geographical location. In order to compete, the bottom half of domestic workers must take a pay cut, and so it goes. Both major corporations and small business owners rely on government benefits in order to supplement their low-wage workers. I used to work as an art teacher at an after-school private studio, which had 20 locations in Southern California. When I first started, I was paid per class instead of hourly, but when I calculated my hourly wage, I was earning about $5 per hour, and this was in 2014-2015. After a year, I was earning roughly $1,800 per month, and I remember the company mailing me a pamphlet about how I could potentially qualify for Medi-Cal and EBT because I made so little. And I also hear of Walmart doing basically the same thing. I'm not sure if they're still doing it, but I know they used to. And pretty much at every job I've ever had, they told us to go the extra mile and work hard so that they can grow the company. By growing the company, the worker will eventually get a pay raise. In my limited life experience, growing the company often equates to opening up new locations for more people to work menial, low-wage, life-sucking jobs. There is still a constant outflow of income from the community to the distant place owned by a face nobody has ever seen before and a name nobody has ever heard of. For a system that creates jobs, why are so many of us qualifying for food stamps and having to get second jobs? If there aren't enough resources, why is there so much waste? Why are all of these restaurants, stores, and individual people throwing so much away? We overconsume unnecessary products so that we can, quote, make a living, but in the process of chasing monopoly money, we exploit the earth and each other. I have a college friend who's from a small town in Maine, and he's expressed to me several times that he wants to move to either San Diego or Hollywood to live in the city. And of course, I welcome this, but being from a large city, I wondered what his attraction to it was. For me, the city is extremely cramped, controlled, dirty, unfriendly, and literally smells like pee. You're surrounded by millions of strangers that you don't really interact with or say hello to, and a lot of times you don't even speak the same language. My friend told me that people in small towns have basically given up and there's really nothing to do, which disillusioned me to my romantic fantasy of a small town. After he said this, it made me wonder why and how a small town could be as soul sucking as a city. In small towns, everyone grows up together and they more or less have things in common. And small towns also typically have access to more natural resources and they have more open space upon which to build. And that's when it dawned on me. Small towns have the resources and open space to build. Business and industry always starts with the natural resource as square one. When I went to Humboldt State University in Northern California, it was located in a small town called Arcata. The Pacific Northwest in general is known for its lumber industry, which was the main source of income for most of the small towns. And lumberjacks are even the university mascot. I'm not sure when, but the lumber industry left America for the most part, presumably to a foreign land where it's, quote, cheaper. When the industry left, the money left with it. The logging industry was replaced with marijuana for Northern California, but if that goes overseas as well, which there's a high chance it will since it became legal recently, then all the small towns in Northern California will be struggling that much more. I tried to imagine what Humboldt County would be like if it was untouched by industry or the outside world. I strongly believe that it is part of human nature to be creative. We create places of worship, places to live, places to celebrate. We create stories, we create works of art, we create drama. We are creative creatures. And when industry first moves into a small town, it, quote, creates jobs. It convinces the men of the town to leave behind their community responsibilities and join the corporation instead. Corporation uses the time, strength, and labor of young men to start consuming the natural resources surrounding the town. At first, as usual, there is a boom in the town's economy. Because of the abundance of trees, the prices are able to stay competitive, which means that workers can make a comfortable living and their wives can probably stay at home with the children. As the logging continues, over time there will be less and less trees, which means that the cost of the trees they do cut down becomes more expensive and therefore less desirable. There is a steady stream of layoffs until finally the company moves to a new location where there are more resources at cheaper rates. And this is when we see the decay of the small town. It's the natural conclusion to an unsustainable model. Over time, capitalism essentially enslaves whomever lives on the land with the most resources. As things start to go downhill, each generation of laborers must work harder and longer for less pay, while costs of living continue to go up, creating generations of borderline slavery. The harder one works, the more quickly the crash comes. We can see this the most in countries where we outsource. The people who harvest our food, our trees, animal furs, and everything else are basically slaves. Under natural law, those who live on wealthy land are the wealthiest people because the abundance continues to circulate within the group. Under capitalism and socialism, the wealthiest of us have their resources siphoned to other people, depleting the land of its natural wealth and beauty and enslaving those who live on it. This is what capitalism does. It takes wealth away from those who have it and gives it to those who don't. Then socialism gives their wealth back to them in minuscule, controlled amounts. Over time, we've been seeing this in America and other Western countries as well. The inhabitants of small American towns became increasingly dependent on the government's social system because their jobs as waitstaff doesn't pay enough for them to survive independently. Sorry about that. That was a phone call. But under natural law, the area one is born into really only has enough to support itself, plus a little extra to either store or trade. When industry moves in, it artificially lowers the value of the resources and the people who live close enough to gather it, creating a pyramid scheme and overextending an area's ability to produce. When the earth is depleted of all of her resources in that area, the industry leaves, discarding the people as it goes. And once gone, the pride in one's self as well as pride in one's town tends to go with it. The wealth of the small town is now being sold in stores in big cities as a trendy item where it will eventually be thrown away the next season. When you live off of your own land, you're more apt to take care of and protect it. However, when you live off of the resources of another's land, you have no problem destroying it because you're not around to suffer the consequences or see what's going on. When you believe that your home and livelihood are based upon harvesting the natural resources around you en masse, you will be more willing to destroy your home. But in the destruction of your land, you ultimately lose your home and livelihood anyways, and not only for yourself, but for future generations. I started to think about why my friend said he was attracted to the city. He said there's more things to do, it's more open-minded, and more importantly, we have more job and career opportunities, especially for artists and musicians, which he is. Well, this thought made me think back to our roots when we were a tribal society. I imagine that the first half of the day is devoted to community responsibilities such as farming, hunting, building homes, and whatever's going on. And after our responsibilities were taken care of, people had leisure time to do whatever they wanted. They could go exploring, play games, play music, have spiritual ceremonies, celebrations, parties. You do whatever. It's your time. And that's because activities go wherever human consciousness goes. And human consciousness goes where it can survive, which is typically places with food, water, and healthy soil for agriculture. As industry has moved in, wealth and resources have been concentrated into a few cities in a few countries throughout the world. With this, human consciousness followed along. There are other reasons, but I feel one of the main reasons for there being more opportunities and activity in the city is because there are more people. I love Los Angeles because I feel I can find anything I want within a 20-mile radius of where I live. We have all different kinds of foods, access to different spiritual ideologies, and as a hobbyist fine artist who loves working with their hands, I have really grown to appreciate the amount of abundance and wealth and material that we have. I've blown glass, worked with metal, wood, clay, oil paints, watercolors, lead, charcoal, different kinds of papers and different kinds of canvases. The list goes on and on. I have all these different resources and materials at my disposal, and to be honest, I have no idea where any of it comes from, aside from the local art store. Living in Los Angeles, I feel I have the entire world at my disposal. But the only reason for this is because other people keep moving here and bringing their culture, food, and knowledge with them. If everyone went back to their small towns and motherlands tomorrow, there wouldn't be anything to do in Los Angeles. But cities are artificial, especially the desert of Los Angeles. The only reason why we have an abundance in resources is because America works with other countries around the world to subjugate people that live on wealthy land, basically. The recession we're in is contrived and artificial. It is the natural conclusion to a system that was not sustainable. Our system gives a large payout at the beginning, then accumulates debt throughout until it inevitably busts at the end. Whomever is left holding the hot potato is the loser. How is it cheaper to purchase products from overseas? Having a constant outflow of money and it being concentrated into the hands of the same groups of people over and over again is creating the recession. Because people can't afford as much, they spend less, creating even fewer jobs. More people are fighting for less opportunities and are now willing to work for less as well, thus continuing the downward spiral. We will be living in a government-subsidized socialist society driven by capitalism. Soon it will be a world of slaves serving the corporations and the small percentage of people who run them. I don't know this for fact, but I strongly believe that there is somebody in every town who can fulfill your need, or at least somebody in a nearby town. There are people who want to be farmers, but it's too expensive. There are people who want to make clothing and pottery and furniture and cars and inventions and all of these different things, but we can't support them. Do we actually need slave and indentured labor in order to maintain existence on planet Earth? We've been living this way for about 6,000 years. And during the 200,000 years of human existence, it wasn't until the last 6,000 and really the last 100 years that our planet has been teetering on the edge of extinction. Is using slave labor cheaper? Yes, for the few who can manage to subjugate everyone else. Under natural law, humans and animals and plants are entitled to the earth they're born on. In tribes, everyone did have careers, called responsibilities. They took care of themselves, and they took care of each other, and they took care of the planet. But now tribal responsibilities have been confused with corporate responsibilities, and people think that they are one and the same. When we adhere to natural law and we align ourselves with the rhythms of the earth, humans become the caretakers of planet Earth instead of the cancer. This is our responsibility. Taking care of fictional corporate necessities is not taking care of yourself, the family, or the earth. This is irresponsible. And why is it irresponsible? Because it inevitably leads to your death. That's why. Humans originally began trading to acquire things they couldn't make or grow themselves. The products that were traded were products that were in surplus. There was extra. When we take things from other people, which is not extra, this is not called trading. This is called theft. Lately, I've really started to enjoy gardening. Living in Los Angeles, I mainly grow citrus fruits, avocados, dates, olives, beans, chilies, things like that. I would describe my diet as Mediterranean meets Central American, and I have a bounty of food year round. I give the extras to my friends' church, and I sell them on eBay too. However, I cannot grow apples, rice, berries, cherries, or tropical fruits. Our desert weather is too extreme. It's too hot during the day, too cold at night, not enough water, and when there is, it's a flood. My mom grows these things, but I find it to be too high maintenance, requires too much water, and the amount of food that's produced doesn't make up for the amount of time and resources it took to grow it in the first place. So it's just not for me. When I want foods I can't grow myself, or when I feel lazy, which is often, I go to the store or farmer's market. Usually the store, because I can't afford the farmer's market. The things I can grow in my backyard can be grown at a local Los Angeles farm. Just using my hometown as an example, I'm not going to speak for everyone, I'm just generalizing as an example. Although Los Angeles can grow citrus fruit, the people of Los Angeles don't get their lemons from local farmers. Instead, they purchase it from grocery stores who get their products from foreign countries. I feel if you're going to purchase something from a foreign country, it should be because the area you're living in can't produce that product. I cannot grow blackberries myself, but Northern California can. They have a surplus of berries, and I have a surplus of lemons. That's an even trade. It's in harmony with natural law and maintains equilibrium. This is not our current model. It would be like Southern California invades and colonizes Northern California and forces the people to give us 4 times as many blackberries as we give them lemons. Then we convince a few of them to move south so that they can grow our lemons for us, which we then use to trade back to them. I try to imagine what life would be like if we went back to natural law. I don't necessarily want to live out in the tundra and live completely off the land, but I most certainly feel that there is a way that we can live in a high society that's under natural law. This is when the internet and postman become my two best friends. Anything I can't find locally from people in my neighborhood, state, or country, I can purchase from an artisan in another part of the world. I think of websites like Etsy specifically. I've purchased items from artists in Turkey, Singapore, China, England, Sweden, as well as from towns that are only a few hours away from me. I can purchase whatever I want directly from the people who make and harvest the items. Of course, Etsy gets its cut, but I feel this model is still in harmony with natural law, as well as being convenient and supports individual people instead of major corporate conglomerates. Each individual artist sets their price based on their needs and resources available to them. Slave labor creates recessions and overindulgent societies. It does not contribute to the growth of the world, it contributes to the world's decay. Capitalism does not create jobs, it destroys communities. Once the community is destroyed, the people will be locked into a socialist prison. I am not a religious being, but I was raised Roman Catholic and still remember a lot of the Bible stories I learned from Sunday school. Specifically in Isaiah chapter 52, verse 4, it says, "For thus said the Lord, you have sold yourselves for naught, and you shall be redeemed without money." We've sold our lives, our lands and resources, and the lives of our children in the pursuit of monopoly money, hoping to be the lucky winner of a master position instead of the slave. This upcoming economic crash will be our last chance to exit the beast system. This will be our last opportunity at ending slavery and climate change, and our last opportunity to regain the freedoms we've lost throughout the years. Thank you for your time and have a good day or night.